First note of the day. We are recording today's presentation. We're going to make these available as webcasts. We record in Chicago. We like to record these just to build a library of all the information, your questions. We will inevitably get into some interesting conversations today. We like to have those on record and just kind of talk about, share those with other clients. If for any reason you don't want that information online, you don't want that available to the public, let us know and we can actually cut that conversation out in the editing process before we make it available. Any questions on that? Okay. So this is what we're going to talk about this morning, about for the next 2 hours. The overall agenda for today is I'm going to introduce you to Agile. We're going to talk about some of the basics. We're going to talk about the Agile Manifesto, some of the reasons for Agile, where we are today, popular Agile methods, and talk a little bit about how should I be thinking about it in my organization. Based on that conversation, we're going to jump then into something called emergent architecture, modeling and emergent architecture, and that's what Gary's going to talk about probably a little before lunch and a little after lunch. That's really the next step that you take down the Agile pathway, which is understanding how do I model and how do I architect a little bit at a time versus this giant architecture that we're all used to. Finally, we'll conclude the day with talking about Agile testing, and Steve is actually going to talk to you about that, how it differs from more traditional testing at the end, the asynchronicity of Agile testing, the whole team approach to testing. So the goal here is to kind of take you through the life cycle of agility, not just introduce you to Agile and then say have fun with that, but talk about what it looks like over the lifespan of a product. As Dave said, we like to have these be very interactive sessions. If you think of a question during a slide, stop me by all means. We'll have a discussion. I'm going to probably time box this presentation to about 2 hours. So we might hop over a little bit, but inevitably we'll come back and talk about it throughout the day. So don't be afraid to jump in. This point, question and answer at the end. Usually we don't spend any time on that because we've talked about everything that you guys have questions with by that point. So again, I'm Chad Albrecht. I'm Vice President of Centair's Agile practice. I've been doing this for about 20 years. I've been practicing Agile since the late 90s. I didn't call it Agile back then, and what you'll see is I actually called it lightweight. I've tried Spiral. I've tried a bunch of different things. I've been a consultant. I've been an executive. I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of different companies, see a lot of different environments. I'm very passionate about Agile. I've seen it do amazing things for organizations that were stuck, get them unstuck. My contact information is down there. I blog quite a bit. I tweet when I remember to, so it usually goes in spurts. But I can be reached either at this email address, off my blog. You can tweet me. You can find me on LinkedIn. So if you have any questions after today, feel free to reach out. Dave talked a little bit about who we are, who Centair is. One thing I didn't mention on the previous slide is I'm a professional Scrum trainer, and we're partners with Scrum.org. Scrum.org I'll talk about later in the deck, but that's Ken Schwaber's organization. He's the father of Scrum, one of the fathers of Scrum, and we've partnered with them to develop a lot of the curriculum that they have. We teach all the curriculum, and we believe very strongly in Scrum as a framework for starting down the path to agility. We also are very much in line with Microsoft. We're a Gold Application Lifecycle Management partner. We were Partner of the Year this year. We're a finalist in Partner of the Year. We're heavily in the mobile space as well. We're Apple developers. We also do cloud. So that ties us all together with Agile, mobile, and cloud. We think that's where the future of computing is going, this ubiquitous computing idea, and developing software in a very fast, people-focused method. Those are the technologies that will enable it. So we do Java, we do .NET, we do iOS, and we do quite a bit of training and coaching around those technologies. So we don't just do development, we do a lot of management consulting as well. Any questions about who we are or who I am? Okay. Just a quick note here. These are 3 things that you should take a look at, 3 booklets and books that you should take a look at after today if you want to have more questions. These are good primers. Scrum Guide can be found down at scrum.org. Agile Software Development with Scrum was Ken and Mike's first book. You saw both of them in that video that was playing early on. And then Agile Software Engineering with Visual Studio. Sam Gu is the director of DevDiv. Is that right? Is that his title now? Sam's a very instrumental player at Microsoft, understands where Microsoft is going, what their tool stack looks like. Nino Lioge is another professional Scrum trainer. The 2 of them collaborated on this book to really present a very cohesive picture of how to use Visual Studio with Scrum. This is based on Nino's work with Nino and Sam's work with the professional Scrum developer program that we teach. So this is the book form of the professional Scrum developer program. We'll talk more about the PSD, professional Scrum developer program, later on today. Agile history. So I guess before I jump into this, one of the comments that we received in Chicago, we had a little bit more of an advanced group. As I went through this is more of a primer presentation. So if you guys feel like you're listening to Wikipedia, jump in and say, all right, we got that. Chad, I know all that stuff. Let's talk about this. At any point, just throw that in there and we can go down some tangents if you already know this stuff. But I'm going to try to give you a little bit of background about where this stuff came from and how we got to where we are today. But I realize that all of you might already know that. So again, if at any point you want to talk about more advanced topics, chime in and let me know. So software development as a whole, you really need to think about that to really understand where Agile came from and where we are as an industry today. Recognize that we're less than 200 years old. You think about mechanical engineering, civil engineering, even electrical engineering. It's many hundreds of years old, if not thousands of years old. Software engineering, software development, the craft of developing software is very young, very immature. Some of the first programmers, 1815, 1852, Lady Byron wrote software or proposed software in some of her writings for Babbage's analytical engine. She's really considered the first modern programmer. So that's really not that long ago that we have this concept of software development emerging. The kind of software that we're used to talking about today that don't involve changing gears and cogs and stuff like that really kind of gelled in the mid-1900s. So 1960, 1970, we really see formalization of a lot of the foundation of the techniques that we use today. So that only puts us about 50 years old, 50 to 75 years. Viewed as a traditional engineering discipline, right? We think about this, we structure, we build blueprints. How many people use the term blueprint in their organization? Yeah, so, right, traditional engineering. We build this blueprint and then we just follow the blueprint to write software. Then came the internet. So some examples of things that kind of happened in the 90s is people started writing code really, really fast, saying, this is more of an artistic thing. This is more of a heuristic activity than a formal engineering activity, and I don't need to follow a plan. I can just write software based on something that's unfolding in my head. eBay was written over a long holiday weekend. The basic structure of eBay was written in a few days. Speed to market became name of the game. So everybody became fascinated and really compelled by getting software out very, very fast. How many people were actually developing software in the 90s in this room? What things did you see? I mean, were you on projects where you really felt that quickening of we got to get this out faster, and it just felt like we were being pushed into uncomfortable space? Does anybody have any experience with that they want to share? A lot of animated GIFs. Yeah, that was popular back then. Fuchsia on web pages. It was good stuff. Anybody else? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what was that going well for Motorola? I mean, was there, Okay. Okay. Inevitably, there was some pressure, I'm sure, to move faster and to figure out how to do things more efficiently. And I'm sure in order to do that, they looked at metrics to figure out how they could make things better. The Mythical Man Month. You guys familiar with that book? The interesting thing about the Mythical Man Month is Brooks, the guy who wrote the book, Fred Brooks, wrote the first version in 1975. So as we're kind of getting started with software development, and he felt and saw the pain that was emerging in the 90s and published it and added some additional sections in 95. He got a lot of stuff wrong in that book, and he admittedly got a lot of stuff wrong in that book, but he at least saw a lot of the problems that people were seeing in the 90s and tried to talk about and tried to open the discussions. So in the late 90s, we started experimenting. You know, we had the Motorola method kind of being the standard, right? Everybody was marching through these gates and very structured, very formal. Late 90s, people were like, how can we get rid of some of this formality and still build quality software? So lightweight techniques were born. You heard a couple of people in the video that we were watching before we started talk about lightweight. That's what Agile was called before it was called Agile. It was lightweight. And people experimented. A lot of experimenting happening in the 90s. The interesting point is the concepts behind lightweight, the ideas, date back to 1957. So even at the birth of software, people were thinking about, you know, maybe this isn't a formal engineering method. Maybe this isn't the right process to use for software. So all of this starts coming together in the 90s. So the early implementations of these lightweight methods, feature-driven development, RD, XP, Scrum, DSDM, late 90s. People started actually putting names on these things and experimenting with them in organizations. By February 2001, Snowbird, Utah, all these guys get together that were kind of publishing papers and experimenting in companies, and they say, let's pull all this stuff together. Let's pull all these frameworks together and see if we can build something that has an overall feel and direction and states what we're all about. And they build this, the Agile Manifesto. And really what they emphasize here is 4 points, 2 sides to each point. Stuff on the left has more value than the stuff on the right. You'll hear a lot of people talking about the Agile Manifesto like it's the only thing that exists is the stuff on the left. Not true. They wanted it to be basically weighted heavier on this side, but both things are important. So individuals and interactions, right? Talking about things, figuring out how to make something work, going to be more successful than just following the process and using tools. Blindly following process and tools. Working software. If it's working, I know where I'm at all times, right? Over comprehensive documentation. Gary's going to talk about documentation as just being a model, right? It's just a discussion. You're building an architecture, you're writing a document, it's not real. You still have no idea how long it's going to take you to get there until you get into some of the code and emit working software. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This really speaks to trust, starting to form a relationship with your clients, showing them working software, interacting with them, and showing that you can build software. Responding to change or following a plan. If you're following a plan and the market changes, your client's needs change, your stakeholders are asking for something different, and you say, listen, we've got this Gantt chart, it's been hanging in the war room for 2 years now, we're following that plan. It's not helping anybody, it's hurting you in a lot of cases, so let's respond to that change. Let's figure out if we can come up with techniques to respond to that change. Again, we value these things more, but we still use process and tools. We still do document for communication purposes. We still are going to have contracts, right? It's the basis of our society is contracts. Following a plan. We still need to plan. We still need to look forward, and we still need to forecast where we're going. So today, we've been doing this for 10 years under the umbrella of Agile. What is Agile? You'll hear people say, are you guys doing Agile or are you doing Scrum? It's a little bit of a misnomer. Agile is an umbrella for all of these techniques, whether it be Scrum or XP, Lean. We'll talk about a lot of these today. But Agile encompasses all of it. So it's techniques, frameworks, process. Does that make sense? It's like saying baseball. You know, baseball means a lot of things. There's a lot of things under that umbrella. There's teams, there's averages, metrics, different ways of batting. I mean, it's a large area. It's a large domain. Agile is a similar thing. It's a word that covers a lot of different things. But typically, it's speaking to specific techniques and frameworks. Any questions so far? So statistically, where have we come in the last 10 years? What are we doing today? What are people out there doing? 2010 version 1 study surveyed almost 5,000 developers in almost 100 countries. 90% claim to be doing some form of Agile development. And what that statistic means is, when asked, are there any teams in your organization that are using Agile? Did the developer respond yes? So 90% of these 4,770 developers responded yes, that we are doing some form of Agile. In 2009, Forrester and Dr. Dobbs looked at what specific teams were actually using to develop software. And what they found was kind of interesting. I've been looking at this for the last 10 years and watching this. When we first started in 2001, when the guys got together and formed the Agile Manifesto, this was it, right? Everybody was doing waterfall. There were a few people doing things like RUP and Spiral and stuff like that around 2000. This was almost 70% of what people were doing. This was non-existent. Everybody was doing some form of method. And a very small sliver, it was about 5%, I'd have to go back and look, but it was a small sliver was doing some form of lightweight, which is now Agile. Over the last 10 years, this has been growing. These two have been growing. These have been shrinking. This, I think, is the most fascinating, that there are people that are completely throwing out any form of process, putting good people in a room, and saying, go build something. We're up to a third of the companies out there are doing that right now. And there's, well, yeah. We could have a whole presentation and whole discussion on why this is, but the point is that this is growing too, but what you're going to hear today is a work in progress, is the point that I'm making, is that it's the best that we know, and this has been growing as well, but so has this, pushing out waterfall and iterative techniques. So that's telling me that we still have a ways to go. So as you hear about what Agile is, and you hear about emergent architecture and Agile testing, know that we're on a point of a continuum, that this isn't an end state, that there's a lot more to do. So bear with us as we continue to experiment and learn in organizations how to build software. The good thing is that Agile is growing. The reason that Agile is growing is that we're getting a lot right. We don't have it perfect yet, but we're getting a lot of it right. And that's what I'm going to share with you today, is this thought of Agile consensus, right? We started out 10 years ago. Let's try this. Some of these things worked. Some of them didn't work so well. What you're seeing across the board in all of these, so Scrum, Agile modeling, in all of these Agile techniques that form up 35% of the companies out there, what they're using, is that you're starting to see a lot of similarity. And if you go home and watch that video about the signers of the manifesto, you'll hear them talk about this consensus as well. That lot of kind of stealing back and forth. XP and Scrum used to be different camps. Now they've kind of melded together. Lean was thought of a separate thing, and people still think of it as a separate thing, kind of melding together. So the techniques that are working are starting to become more prevalent across the board. So I talked about our relationship with Scrum.org and why we like to start people with Scrum down the Agile pathway. It's the most popular, and there's a reason for that. It works very, very well in a lot of cases. As we'll talk about at the end of the presentation, it doesn't work well for every case. But for most cases, most teams, and I'm sure most of the teams that you're working on, you're developing something that's fairly complex. How many people in here feel that what they're working on is complex? One person? Wow. Two, three? Okay. How would you describe, those of you that didn't raise your hand, how do you view the software that you're working on? How would you describe it? Commodity? Simple? Okay. So innovation, think of innovation different as complexity, right? Is there pieces of your software that get very complicated to the point of being complex? I didn't see that on the website. Yeah, no, that's true across the board. So complexity may be inherent complexity. It may be built-in complexity, right? Where we've got this thing that's just been growing over the years, and now it's very, very complicated. How do we get back out of that? Scrum works well for getting us out of that, and we'll talk about why that is later in the presentation. So what are you guys using? I mean, a few people raised their hand for the manifesto. How many people have learned about Scrum or know what Scrum is? How many people are using Scrum in their organizations? Okay. For those that aren't, what are you using? Waterfall? What you get? Waterfall? Okay. So are we just Waterfall and Scrum in here, or is there anything else that anybody's using? How many people are in that nothing category? Okay. It's like the calico cat of of development. Okay. Like mini waterfall, like trying to get a little bit of stuff done and then move on and get a little bit farther. Okay. So what's interesting is in Chicago, we talked about that nothing category, and people all laughed in the room. They're like, yeah, people using nothing. And then as we got through this, and I asked, what are people using? No hands went up. And I said, well, how many people are doing nothing? And like the majority of the room raised their hand. I'm like, well, you guys know what nothing looks like. Why are you asking about it? So it's every group's a little bit different, but we're seeing that nothing. As I'm talking to groups like you guys, we're seeing that nothing being very, very prevalent, and it's averaging out to about a third of the people are saying, yeah, we're doing a little iterative, we're doing maybe a little Scrum, but when I ask you, what are you using? Using Scrum? No. You using iterative? Nah. What are you using? Well, we're not really using anything. We're using a little bit of everything. And that's becoming very, very popular. It's all over the board. Large corps. It was global. And it was, like I said, 91 countries, all the way from like the 3-person company to, Fortune 50 companies. And if you guys are interested, let me know. I can send you the link. If you type in 2010 version 1 Agile study into Google, first thing up there. It's pretty easy to find. Dr. Dobbs' study is pretty easy to find too, and they're both readily available. A lot of people blogging on them and expounding what's going to happen next because of these metrics. But yeah. Other questions? All right. So Agile today, with people doing nothing and what we've learned in the last 10 years, this is the start of this consensus that I was talking about. What successful teams that are able to kind of say, yes, we're doing Agile, yes, we're doing Scrum. Are you successful with it? Yes, we're successful with it. This is some of the commonality that you see. Short cycles deliver software value quicker, and we'll talk more about that. Hopefully we'll get into some discussions around that. Transparency. What do you guys think transparency means? Anybody have any ideas? What does transparency mean? I'm sorry, Overlord. I do not understand. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that, and your project manager comes over. How are things going? Good, good. You're good, you're green, you're green, you're green. Red, right? Don't really know where you are. Everybody's good until they're not. And it's a two-way street, right? What do you expect from me as a developer? I'll tell you where I am at every point, but I need to have transparency into what the business goals are. I need to see where we're going. I need to understand some of the financial models. So it's a two-way transparency street. And the successful teams do this well. I've blogged about a couple different models that talk about what if I could understand the potential revenue in every release of the software that I build. Would that change behavior at all? If I could look at an individual feature and say, this is going to generate $5,000 worth of revenue versus something that's going to generate $10,000 in revenue, which may I put more emphasis on? So similarly, when the business asks, where are we with that software? We need to be able to show working software. We need to talk about where we're headed and talk about quality issues, things that we're struggling with. Be very, very transparent and open with that status. And you'll find a lot of success, a lot of teams that are doing that get successful. And the reason for that is you start building trust. If I tell you I'm struggling with this one area, I can't get a build server up and running, and the business can actually help you with some of that, you start having a little bit of trust with one another. It takes a little bit to get there. Once you're there, you start talking about reduction, elimination of waste, and lean. So what things am I doing from the moment that I have an idea to the moment that the software is developed or that idea is in the software? What does that chain of events look like? Are there things that I'm doing in that chain of events that don't provide value or are not useful to anybody? Which leads us to this idea of chains or systems, right? Value streams, critical chains, value flow. Anybody here in manufacturing? Say what? That's where some of this comes from, lean, yeah, TPS. But yeah, this is used very heavily in manufacturing to think about a car. It starts with sheet metal, turns out as a car. Along the process, we add value to that sheet metal. And it's important to understand how we add value to that sheet metal to ultimately produce a car. We look at it a little bit differently in software, but the general idea is the same, is that there's this flow of events, this system of events that happen. And if we can do that in a more efficient way by stripping out waste and thinking about optimizing the system instead of optimizing individual cells, we can be more productive. Does everybody kind of get that? These things right here, transparency to system thinking, is kind of the core of Agile. So how many people have read The Goal? The book The Goal. Okay, if you haven't, write it down. Go read it. It's a good foundational primer to understand where some of this stuff came from. It talks about that idea of from sheet metal to car. How do we make the system the best that it can be instead of optimizing the individual cell? So what does that look like in software? How many people have heard a developer say, my job is to just write code, and I'm going to crank out the most code that I can today? No? Okay, three people? Wow, you guys are working in some awesome environments. That's an example of non-system thinking or non-value stream thinking, right? If I optimize what I'm doing in my individual cell, that must be beneficial to the overall system. And study after study after study has shown that not to be the case. What does work is starting with the sheet metal and figuring out how to get that idea through the system as quickly as possible. So that may mean you have two developers that are doing nothing. You may have a QA person that's actually doing nothing and waiting for that idea to get pulled through and so they can test it. It seems counterintuitive, but it's pretty foundational. That system idea, that chain of events, very foundational to Agile. And when we start doing these things, teams are finding that the software that they're building, higher quality than what they've been able to do before. Again, not intuitive. We've been trained on waterfall for 50 years to think about things in these centers of excellence and quality centers, and we've got all these great ideas about quality, and we've been doing it over and over and over again and producing low quality software. What high-performing Agile teams are finding is that they're kicking the butts of traditional teams as far as producing quality. And you're going to see why that is today with some of the emergent architecture ideas, Agile testing ideas, and even some of the stuff that we talk about later in my presentation. Self-organizing and implicit motivation. These are very hot topics today. I would say that we're probably the greenest in these areas. Self-organizing is all about putting a team of skilled people together and letting them figure out how to achieve a certain goal. Not micromanaging them, not telling them how to do their work, but setting a goal for them and letting them figure out the path to get there. This is very difficult in large companies. I will tell you that in small companies, they do this automatically. Most companies do this automatically. Fortune 1000 companies, you talk about a self-organizing team, you hear things like, well, I'll manage the self-organizing team. I'll make sure they're doing their jobs. Okay, right? So it's not, business schools aren't teaching it. They're just starting to. They haven't taught it in the past. It still doesn't feel right. It feels awkward. We have the concept of management structures, middle management, power, politics, all playing into pushing against self-organizing teams. And to compound that, this idea of implicit motivation. How many people know what implicit motivation is? It's probably covered it in your Psych 101 class. It's probably like 2 pages, and you went, okay, I know what that is. Motivation, basically, you're doing something for that activity's sake. As opposed to explicit motivation, which is, hey, if you do this really well, I'm going to give you a $1,000 bonus. You're externally motivated by that. Daniel Pink, new book called Drive. Anybody read that? Okay. Talks a lot about this idea of implicit motivation. Last 20 years, a ton of studies on implicit motivation. What makes you and I tick? What makes us do the things that we do? Often not motivated by external things. Often not motivated by money. How many people in here play an instrument? Man, you guys are a rough crowd. One person. All right. How many people like solving puzzles? All right. Why do you do that? You're not. What's the benefit? Are you externally motivated by that? Why are you solving a puzzle? These are the questions that kind of intrigued psychologists for a long time, and we started studying that within the last 20 to 30 years. And what we're finding is that when you build a team, motivating them with money, with bonuses, with things like, hey, if you guys perform well, I'll give you money, it works well initially, and then it actually has the opposite effect. I just read an article this morning before I came about a company in New York that is trying to motivate their employees to stay there 5 years. If you stay there for 5 years, they'll give you $50,000. And you look at the picture and the environment of that this company is being run in. There's fluorescent lights, there's fake plants in the background, and the desks are old beat-up desks, right? So it's not a conducive work environment. It just doesn't look like a fun place to work. The teams that are making this work and figuring out implicit motivation are figuring out, hey, we want to make work a fun experience. We want to make it something that you want to come to work. We're going to present challenges in front of you, and you want to do it because it's challenging, it keeps you motivated, and it puts you in a state of flow. The state of flow is another thing that's been very, very studied. How many people have actually started working on a project and like hours go by and you look up and you're like, okay, I think I've been sitting here for 15 minutes and 6 hours have gone by. That's flow. And Daniel Pink talks about that in his book. But these two concepts of self-organization and implicit motivation, that's what's coming next. You're going to see a lot of stuff happening in the next couple of years on how to tap into this and how to build environments that support Agile teams. And that's where it's going to come from. Any questions?
There's tie-ins also, I'll just add. There's tie-ins here in self-organizing probably heard the term ROE, results-oriented work environment. That's becoming very popular. Large companies doing that. Best Buy's doing that at the corporate level. I think you
Google.
had a better example. Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. The other thing about implicit motivation and getting away from the engineering model and the engineering mindset, your coders, people that are information workers, aren't guys sitting on an assembly line, right? They have different needs. They're motivated by different things. So again, when we start getting away from the engineering mindset, a lot of these things start to make sense, but also it starts to make sense in terms of what you see in your life day to day or around you day to day.
That's a good point. Just to tack on to that a little bit, the explicit motivation does work with repetitive tasks, right? So if you have somebody that has to put a bolt in a hole and thread a nut on, explicit motivation, money rewards do work in that environment. Knowledge workers, creativity, it actually has the opposite effect. And it's been studied repeatedly that doesn't work well. If you do want to provide financial rewards for your Agile teams, there's this idea of now that rewards, right? I built an environment to allow you to be successful. You kicked butt. You delivered on the date that you said you were going to do. Now that you've done that, here's a $5,000 bonus. Right? You don't lay it out there as that carrot. That's the effect that causes problems, is the carrot, the stick and carrot effect. Do you want to add anything else? Yep. Yeah. The 20 to early 30-somethings out there, a lot of studies. I'm sure you guys have read some of them. Managing the knowledge worker. If you read a lot of the Harvard Business Review or stuff that comes up on LinkedIn, what we're finding is that these 20-somethings are looking for the awesome environment. As long as they're paid reasonably, they're looking for the environment that's fun to work at and are going to provide them with challenges. And that's presenting a lot of pain for large organizations that have built with the carrot and stick mentality. Right. Yep. So, Any questions on this? I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a side path to what we're talking about, but it does support the teams that are being successful with Agile out there, and it does present a lot of challenges to those of you that are working in a large company that still have that carrot and stick mentality. Know that you're going to face this. You're going to be semi-successful with Agile. It's going to help, but you may struggle to get to that high performance level because of things like this, self-organizing and implicit motivation. Yeah. Yep. Right. What's interesting is, yeah. Right. So two things. One, GE executive team just published an article in Dr. Dobbs 9 months ago, about how they're actually doing pilot programs with Scrum and trying to actually get it to work with FDA. So they are slowly changing. Whether it's real change or not, there's at least an attempt to make a change to become Agile. It's a start. Second is, we're going to talk more about this today because it's an important concept. Status quo, accepting the status quo. All of us saying things like, that's never going to change, right? what you're going to find, and what I'm going to challenge you to go back to your companies with tomorrow, is ask yourself, am I standing in my own way? Am I making an assumption about what my boss thinks, what the president of the company thinks, or is that what he's really thinking? And what's surprising to me is that about half the time you're standing in your own way. That, asking about things like, hey, could we do this way? You find a lot of acceptance. Now, if you just go out and say, hey, I want to do a Scrum project, what do you think? Not a very compelling argument. But if you do your homework and you talk about what the return on investment is going to be and you make a compelling case, executives are more often than not willing to listen and willing to try. This is coming from direct experience. I mean, myself included, making assumptions about what's expected of me, what's expected of my teams, what's expected of my company. Challenging assumptions that we have on a daily basis is how change happens. So think about that a little bit.
I've got two things there. I think it is kind of a misconception that you can't use these methodologies in heavy regulatory sort of environments. It's not true.
Yep.
So that's great. Thank you. You're providing the story that backs up the benefit of everyone.
Yeah, my comment was that leadership is not located in my experience in healthcare support. BE is a company locally does have different mindset.
Yeah.
The local leadership is not global.
Yeah. We're seeing cracks in that. Yeah.
So don't think that you can't do it because of X, Y, and Z design initiative. This penetration is every position. Second thing,
I'll tack into that another common misconception is that you can't use Agile when you've got hardware involved, right? Embedded systems, that kind of stuff. Again, not true. I've worked it, done it, seen it work very, very well. So,
to add on to your statement, are we standing in our own way? And the last time we did this, there were a lot of discussions about how do I sell this? If management doesn't think that it's going to work, how do I sell this? We do need to start talking in their language. We need to talk in their language. We'll talk a little bit about that. Documentation, things like that, what's the value. But
yep.
we need to start selling this to the business owners.
We're using the flexible method. What's funny, if you go and listen to that video with the Agile Manifesto guys, they talk about, why Agile, why naming, and they talk about adaptive and should we use Lean Plus, and it's like, so if that's where you are, I mean, picking a name, fine. Yeah, we can. That's a whole rat hole conversation that we won't get into. All right, we know these methods to work, but stuff we were just talking about requires a new type of culture to work well. Changes power structures in organizations. We talked about these things, right? Could make executives feel uncomfortable. I mean, this is exactly what we were just talking about. Challenges many traditions and ideas. All these things really put up a wall in front of adoption. What I think is so funny about this is we know that the way that we're doing it right now, or the way that a lot of organizations are doing it right now, is broken. And there's a resistance to trying something new. If it's got the name Agile on it, oh, we can't do it. okay, are we going to really be that worse off if we try Agile? I mean, okay, so a couple of pilot programs failed, but so did the last 3 projects we did under our corporate process. So, we know that the market's going to this. Why? Have that constructive conversation with your organizations, and that's starting to be what's happening. Is it's starting to weaken this brick wall that's there right now. Power structures, I got that up here somewhere. Power structures is probably another area, along with the self-organization and implicit motivation, that's going to take some work over the next 10 years. That's not going away. People's thirst for power isn't going away. So how do we incorporate agility into a power structure, into a system where you can have middle management, where you can have executive teams, where you can have autonomous units as well as power structures? There's been some experiments done on that. We'll see where that goes, but no, don't lose hope. There's just like I said, this wall is weakening. The last bullet here: leadership is required. I walk into a lot of organizations that have asked us to help, and what they've done is they've taken a team, they've read all the books, and they said, okay, we've built all these self-organizing teams. We put them together and we put them off on an island, and it's just not working. Well, okay, self-organization means that they're organizing to a goal. Have you provided them with a goal? Well, no. They should figure that out by themselves. They're self-organizing. Quickest way to fail with Agile. You still need to set vision, you still need to set direction, and you still need to help the team when they're asking for help, right? If my team is struggling with doing things like setting up a build server, with branching and merging, what's the best way to do some of this stuff? They're asking for help. Don't just say, well, self-organize. Provide that help and get them a little farther down the path. Self-organization takes time, but it needs to be supported and it needs to be led. Now, that doesn't say management required. Leadership is required. So leading the charge, setting direction, setting vision, setting focus, and talking about where we want to go. Not caring too much about how the team is doing that, but setting the overall direction. Make sense?
I think as un-PC as it might sound, self-organization is not equal to democracy. And when you start seeing that, that's actually kind of mantra there. You mentioned the branching and merging, right? So the team's struggling with branching and merging. We've seen where the pendulum has swung in the developer's mind or the team member's mind far enough that everyone feels like it's democracy. Should we put an index on this table? Let's vote. No, we have an expert here. That, we have a cross-functional team. We have an expert here in databases. That person should be allowed to lead. That person should be allowed to weigh in with experience. So it's not democracy. There's leadership required from the top in terms of vision. There's leadership required inside of that. But again, if you set that sort of expectation and you value people for what their strengths are, this stuff can take care of itself. You don't have to make a big deal out of it. But it's not democracy. You're not going to force a decision.
Yep, good point. And the concepts of servant leadership, if you read anything about servant leadership, that plays right into how you support a self-organizing team. You remove their roadblocks, you support them. You don't manage them, you support them and help them get to where they need to be. So we've talked a little bit about this. I'm interested to hear in your own settings, why are these things hard? We've talked about what we know to work in Agile. We've talked about these power struggles. How many people have tried some form of Agile in their organization? How many people are planning on trying some sort of Agile? How many people are doing either or? I'm not seeing full vote of hands. So how many people are not going to do Agile? Let me ask that question. All right, some people aren't raising their hands. Why are some of these things hard? Why are making cultural changes just generally difficult? I always make the analogy, and people laugh at it, but it's very, very true. You read a book on flying a plane. Go jump in a cockpit and try it. See how that turns out. Climb a mountain with rock climbing gear. Read a book, go try it. See how that turns out. I mean, there's some complexity in both those tasks. There's complexity in what we do in software development, in agility, understanding system thinking. So if you read a book and even go to just a 2-day class and get trained on something, it's still going to be a struggle. There's still some pragmatic, tactical things that need to happen, as well as consulting with experts. Let's talk to people that have done this before, that have been successful at doing this, and so we don't fall down all these holes and, drop out of the sky or fall off the side of the hill. Let's try to be as successful as possible. So, what are the things culturally have you guys seen? Yeah. Yeah, that's a very, very common one. What do you guys think about that? I mean, what would you do in that situation where you've got a project manager that role is no longer required? What would you do? Very, very common technique. Scrum Masters, I find, or project managers, can make very, very good Scrum Masters. They tend to have that tenacity of, hey, are we doing this right? Instead of, hey, how far are you on the project right now? Hey, are we meeting this morning? Hey, are we, where are we on the backlog? Have we done a grooming session? We'll talk about some of those terms, but that tenacity can work really, really well within the Scrum Master role. What else? Got a role? Yeah. Yeah, I hear that a lot, and what's interesting about that is that it's seeing a problem, but it's answering it, I think, incorrectly. What I think we have out there is we have teams that are used to being told what to do, and you have people that are very, very good at what they're doing, and they expect a requirement to tell them exactly what to do. And so when you see depth of skill, when you hear depth of skill requiring experts, really what you want to do is take those reins or take those bindings off of people that know what they're doing and let them lead. And you'll find that there's a lot of people out there that can figure out self-organizing and can lead and be part of that team if you let them. And so it doesn't require experts, all experts. It does require good people on a team, but that's not an Agile problem. That's just a writing good software problem, right?
I would say yes and no. Think of the greenest person that did fresh out of college or whatever, high school interns. Think of the greenest person you can think of. Some of the techniques that Chad talked about, methodologies, pair programming, can be used as an excellent mentor. Can those guys still contribute something? Yes, they have the right attitude. They have understanding that they have a lot of team. They're working towards a goal. It's not functional. I'll do whatever it takes to get what I goal. It can be very valuable. But yes, you end up with a slower velocity. You have some guy from high school who's not a team should probably work.
Yeah, continuous improvement, learning. If you have everybody that can already do the job, having Agile, whatever, you're gonna be more successful. The more experienced people that you have overall, you're going to be more successful. I think there's like a valley there somewhere where you get to cowboy coder and you put a bunch of cowboys in a room and you have like a thermonuclear reaction and everyone quits after 2 months. Yeah, you guys have seen everybody smiling here. I mean, you've seen that, right? Where everybody knows better than everybody else, and it just self-destructs. Yeah.
I wonder, I think for us it's really corporations really like structure,
Yeah, so that's an excellent point. What's interesting is that for this to work in corporate America, you need to act more like the military. I know some of you may be surprised to hear that, but command and control, if you read a lot of stuff coming out of the Department of Defense and how they've structured, how the Army's structured, how the Marines are structured, when you're down at that level where you've got the guy on the ground, they've trained him, they know what his capabilities are. They're not telling him what to do day to day. He has orders about go do this, go do that. He's free to figure out how to get there and do that. So command and control and servant leadership from the military is actually working better than the corporate America power structures that are there. Because heavily trained individuals that know how to do what they're doing don't need to be told what to do every step of the way. They can just be pointed in a direction, and their training kicks in, and they know how to go do it. They set strategy to figure out the tactics, right? So corporate America has a little bit of a slanted view on that, right? They have this power structure, this command and control structure, but it's telling people what to do at the lowest level, and we know that that doesn't work. Yeah. Yep. Sure. Right. Yeah. Right.
So great point, and also, I'll say this, you're never going to stop salespeople from selling stuff. Oh, I bet you. So, yeah. But yeah, that sounds kind of funny, but yeah, I mean that's definitely true. Like what you're saying, we missed those days before anyway. So what are we really losing? And you need to turn that whole, you're not going to tell us when you're going to deliver into, no, we're going to deliver value together. We're going to deliver some sort of value every time. That's what selling themselves.
So you. Yep. Yep. Marketing's not going to be, putting out advertisements with, we'll be having a new button on page 3, right? They're not marketing to that level. They're marketing very, very high level. Let's see, I got market up here. They're gonna look at something like this, right? You got feature A, B, C, D, and E. That's what they're telling the market. Hey, we're going to have social media integration. Hey, we're going to have a new workflow. Hey, we're going to have these things. And in a traditional model, you get a set of requirements for all of A, and you'd have to deliver all of A. And what would happen is that would bleed over into B, and we get later and later and later. The same thing would happen. To your point, what we can do now is we can say, you know what, we have this much of A done now. Is that good enough? Yeah, that's good enough. That's what we wanted. Of course that's what we wanted. These low-value things may never get done. And what we're finding over and over and over again, and people laugh at this, and they challenge us all the time, but this is all the organization needed. This is all the clients needed, is this little chunk up here. And they go on to B, and meet the roadmap, same thing, and C, meet the roadmap, and we just do that over and over again. And after a while, after you do that for a while, marketing becomes a lot more comfortable in laying out a roadmap like that and knowing that you're going to get some level of functionality done. And they don't have that discomfort to know, oh, are you going to be able to hit all of these requirements by, December 31st? So it takes some time, yeah. Heroic, right. Hero event after hero event.
Yeah, and Agile, to me, really spreads all that out in a very low practical time.
Mm-hmm.
And it really takes a while to get it together. So, everybody should really understand the process and think about those things. A year and why it's not like perfect time enough, but it gives you an opportunity.
Right. I've been asked the question to that point a lot, should we go evolutionary or revolutionary, right? Should we start small and kind of make a few changes and see how it goes, or should we just go all in? I've tried both. I've seen more success in revolutionary. I mean, let's just do it. Let's do it right. Let's make sure that we understand it, and let's go and try it. With evolutionary, what happens, and again, especially in a large company, you make a few changes. Yeah, they're kind of working, but we still need to do the documents. Let's just forget about it, right? So people get kind of fatigued by trying these new things that really aren't working in a lot of cases to some larger value. You may be trying, maybe doing Scrum inside of your phase gate process, and that's kind of working, so that kind of keeps going. But overall, some of the tendencies tend to slip on them because, we're still trying to hit this date with all of these requirements anyway. It can just get frustrating after a while. So we usually recommend going a more revolutionary method. To that point, larger project, larger scale. Let's bring in some experts. Let's actually get it right the first time, and just go do it. So. Yep. Awesome. That's actually a good pattern for success. If you're done and marketing's not, we see that again and again and again. It's like, all right, we've just succeeded. Marketing didn't believe it could be done, and you're ready to go. I mean, that's a really good indicator. Good job. Popular Agile methods. So we're going to talk about kind of the embodiment of some of these things that we've been talking about, what they're called, their names, what some of them look like, what their purpose is, etc. Thank you. Scrum, we talked a little bit about it already. Formalized and presented in '95. Ken and Jeff actually put it together in the early '90s. I think they started brainstorming around '92, put a paper together in '93, and presented in '95. It's based on empirical process control. So what that means is instead of guessing at what we don't know, let's start moving forward and sample what we're actually doing. And from that, we can actually make some decisions because the work is already done. Think of it as equivalent to the thermostat in this room. Instead of guessing about what the variables are in this room and how warm it's going to be with all of you in here, and saying, all right, we probably need to turn on the heat because there's this many people coming. We're going to have the projector on, the refrigerator's running, right? This is like project planning, right? We get all these variables that are coming together, and this is how long it's going to take, and we've got risk coefficients and stuff like that. Instead of doing that, let's measure the temperature of the room every 15 seconds. And based on that, we'll turn the heat on, turn the heat off, turn the AC on, turn the AC off, right? We're going to sample and we're going to adjust at increments of time. That's what empirical process control talks about, and that's actually in manufacturing and in chemistry. Empirical process control is actually a formalized method. Within software, Scrum is a framework. So it's a framework for actually looking at what you're doing on a regular basis and providing some adaptive feedback up and down. Simple, lightweight, extremely difficult to master based on all those things that we've already talked about. It stands on transparency. We've talked about what that is. Inspection. Are we getting what we want? Are we producing the software that our customers and our market expects? Right? So for those of you familiar with QA and the terms used there, the V and V. Who knows what V and V stands for? What's the validation piece? What does that mean? Right. So that's what inspection actually addresses, is are we building the right thing? We don't want to just follow requirements. Are we building the right thing for the customer? Is this really what the customer needs? And asking that question on a regular basis too. What happens if we're not? Do we keep moving? No, we adapt, right? We change direction. I like to think about the forecasts that we use in Scrum as one of those hurricane trackers you see on the weather report, right? Oh, hurricane's coming in off the Gulf, and there's a red line, and then there's this big yellow cone, right? We're going to plan for this red line. We know we're going to be probably in there, but we could actually be all the way to the left, all the way to the right. And that's going to depend on what we find in the software, what happens with the market, what happens with the business, right? There's a lot of factors that can affect where that hurricane goes, and so we're going to be responsive to that. That idea or that visualization is represented over and over in the cone of uncertainty. PMI uses that for traditional project management. Steve McConnell popularized it in his software development books, and he talks about it a lot with his different development series. We talk about it when we talk about forecasting in Scrum. So it's, inspecting and adapting. Where's the hurricane now? Where might it go tomorrow? Where the hurricane is now? Where is it going tomorrow? And constantly looking at that to form empirical process control. So this is essentially how we do that, or what the mechanics are for Scrum. You have a Scrum Master that knows this process well, and he understands the inner workings of it. He understands what we're going to see here in a second, and he says, hey, what do you guys need from me? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? If not, let's make sure that you're on that track. Let's make sure we're doing daily stand-ups. Let's make sure that we're doing some of these things. Development team, cross-functional, includes QA, includes your DBAs, includes your tech writers, includes everybody that you need to actually build the working increment of software. Everybody. If you need somebody else to do something on the software before you can consider that software done, they need to be on this team. This is also a big challenge too, which we can get into at some later point. But the silos that exist in our traditional organizations, right? We have the QA department. Try to get a QA person on that team. I think you're asking for somebody to walk across water sometimes. Very, very difficult. Product owner. Product owner meets with stakeholders, meets with the market, meets with the subject matter experts, and says, what do you guys want to build? And what order do you want me to deliver them? And what's most important to you? Puts that in a product backlog, right? I had a conversation with a company in Chicago yesterday, and they were kind of making fun of the term product backlog. They're like, if it's on the backlog, we're never going to get to it. We're moving that fast that it's, if it's backlog, forget about it. We're doing 1 week sprints. We're changing with the market. We're getting feedback, and we're moving. The way that they were understanding the backlog is that it was backlogged work. Think of it as the attack sheet, the list of things that we're going to do in the order that we're going to do them in, right? And it's going to change frequently in a fast company like the one I talked to yesterday, it's going to change a lot. In a larger company where you kind of know what you're doing, it's going to be a little slower moving. You might change it once a month, once every 2 months, but you want it to be able to be flexible. So we put that in a list. We get together and we say, all right, what things can we get done in this first sprint, this first increment of time? We do that in a sprint planning meeting and we produce a sprint backlog. The mechanics of that aren't super important right now, they're details, but there's methods to actually figuring out what you can get done in the individual 1 to 4 week sprint. 1 to 4 weeks of time, what are you actually going to be able to get done? Let's put it on the backlog and let's break it down into individual tasks using hours. And then we're going to track to that. We're going to make sure as a team that we understand where we are in that sprint backlog to getting things done. We do that by talking to one another daily. We talk about, you said you were going to work on this task for 16 hours. You said it was only going to take 16 hours. You've been working on this thing for 4 days. Do you need some help? What went wrong? Should we be raising this up? Should we be, thinking about other things? This is jeopardizing us getting everything done. And the team is challenging one another on this. This isn't the Scrum Master, our project manager. The team challenges one another on these things. And there's techniques to actually get some of those conversations elevated in the daily Scrum. The other important piece yeah, go ahead. Right. And they're addressed real time, right? They're addressed as we go so we don't let them compound. Correct. Yep. Yep. And building trust, the techniques to build trust, we're not going to get into that extensively today, but know that there's mechanisms like, strive for success, go lightweight, strive for success, don't make certain conversations taboo. There's tons of different things that we do when we coach teams to actually do this, to build that trust so they can feel that they can talk about everything that's in their way, and so they don't let those things compound and get pushed to the end. Similarly, we're testing daily, and this I almost put hourly on this. Steve's going to talk a little bit about this, but this is a very important part of building quality into Agile. In traditional techniques, right, we'd write the code, we'd finish the feature, and then we'd hand it to the testing team. We'd say, make sure that that's working okay. In Agile, those two things are happening side by side. We think of a design. Your testing specialist says, how are we going to test that? Good question. Maybe alter the design a little bit, write a little bit of code, write a little bit of a test. We test it. Well, it's not complete. That's all right. We got a little bit of a test. We're going to build more tests. We're going to build more design. We're going to write more code. And those two things move forward together. So we're testing and we're writing code simultaneously. And you get into things like unit testing, integration testing, functional testing, how we do regression, when we do automation. Steve's going to talk about all those things today. We do it side by side with development. The other thing that we do is we look at the product backlog in these sessions called grooming sessions. And we do it about 10% of the sprint. Again, 1 to 4 weeks, so 10% of that time, we're looking at the backlog with the product owner saying, what's coming, what's changed, can you help me refine some of these ideas that are coming, can we even go look at the things that we're working on right now and add some more definition, make sure that we fully understand them, right? So it's a way to know that this list is in the right order, and that there's understanding from the team, from this whole development team, about what's coming next. And the reason for that is when you get back around to the sprint planning meeting, you don't want everything to be a surprise. And the way you know that teams aren't doing grooming is that you'll have these long sprint planning sessions. I've seen organizations that don't do any grooming, they'll have like 3-day sprint planning sessions. The sprint planning should be 4 to 6 hours typically, and that's it, tops. Teams that are grooming well usually end up with less because they already know what's next. It's by the time they get around this corner down here, they kind of know what's coming, and getting into that planning meeting is just a way of formalizing the sprint backlog. So you come around this corner, you've got the backlog all in shape, all your features are being finished. We call those things product backlog items, PBIs. You'll hear that term kicked around today. Finish everything and you produce this working increment of software. Working increment of software. Potentially shippable. Everything done. How do you know you have working software? Or how to think about that is the stakeholders in the room during the sprint review say, all right, great, let's ship it. Do you have to do anything else on it? Is there anything, oh yeah, okay, well we got to do a little bit more testing. Oh, well we have to do this. You don't have working software. It's not done. We formalize that idea or that process by using something called the definition of done. Right? We write down a checklist and we say, in order for you to have completed everything that's on the sprint backlog, they all must meet this checklist. They have to be coded, they need to be tested, they need to be unit tested, they need to be reviewed by the product owner. That's just an example of a definition of done. So when the people in the sprint review say, yep, we're ready to go, ship it, everybody goes, okay, great. Nobody blinks. It's already, it'll go out right after this meeting. We'll push the button and it'll show up on the production site. That's another big area where teams go wrong. And Jeff Sutherland just published looking back in the 10 years of teams that he's worked with, and that was one of the big things that he called out is not having, or the problems with the teams that don't do Agile or don't do Scrum right, is they don't have that working software at the end of the sprint. I don't know if any of you have tried Agile or Scrum. We see this a lot. We see incremental development. We see like, all right, we do a little bit and we kind of look at it, but it's really not ready to ship. It's really not ready to be put out anywhere because it's just working on a developer's machine. And we do a little bit more and kind of get there farther, and still you're pushing all of that work, all of that deployment work to the end, and it can be very, very destructive. So we start from day one with always having working software. There's a lot of subtlety and detail to how you do that.
It's hard for people to believe that you can do that. It's hard for a lot of people to do that.
Yep.
Especially management, but even if people that are doing development, people that are know how to get there. It's hard for them to believe that it takes it once for the sprint. And you hear the various excuses. Well, yeah, but we're not. It's not performance. It's tested. It's not performance. It's tested, but we didn't do the usability testing because somebody else did it. It's not what we're talking about. And what you're saying there, you have excuses like it's not performance testing. That's something that's missing from your definition. Does it mean that we spin up this huge process where we got to have 2 weeks and all sorts of automation to hammer on something and that's a performance test? No, it doesn't. It means that we need to do due diligence on the piece that we develop within that sprint to make sure that it performs okay. You can slice through that the way you can slice through everything else for the overall product that you develop.
Point.
It's not as hard or as easy.
Yeah. There's techniques there. Point being is it can be done. And multiple teams are doing it. Thousands of teams are doing out there very, very successfully. So it's outside of this. Is just a quick overview of it. If you're interested, come see me after or at lunch today, and we can talk about how to dig into some of those. So with that working software, the product owner then is looking at it. The team's going to go back and do another sprint planning meeting and do another loop. During that process, product owners are working with stakeholders, showing it to clients, looking at really playing around with the software pretty extensively, taking feedback from all these stakeholders, and adjusting the product backlog, which is then groomed by the team. The process continues. You kind of have a flow. So I worked with other Scrum trainers on putting this together. Ken Schwaber and I talked quite a bit about this diagram. And one thing that we wanted to show is a distinct beginning and end of the sprint, but that there's flow here, right? You have this general idea of continually moving, and you're sampling right here. You're always sampling what's going on, but you generally have an overall cadence to moving forward, and it gets to become very natural after a while where you just kind of do these things, and it seems very continuous like you're seeing up here, rather than oh, we do a sprint and everybody stops and it's a reset. It becomes a lot more natural. So that's what I wanted to represent here. Yeah. Sure. As long as you can do that and you've got somebody like yourself that's making sure that that's happening, that's great. The danger there is that you focus on the features, you focus on the positive, you focus on, hey, look at all this great stuff we're building, and then bugs compound. And I'm not going to get into that, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So there's some issues that I'm struggling with there with the halt and fixed quality there that I don't want people to think that that's standard process for doing Agile. Yeah, and there's different ways of actually achieving that without doing that, right? So talking about quality a little bit differently is that we're going to do one feature. Let's make sure that we got it, right? Let's just do this one feature, this 1 week sprint or 2 week sprint. Let's get the unit tests in there. Let's have 100% code coverage when we do that. And let's do these things. Let's talk about these activities daily. Let's see where we are. But we're only going to do one thing. And we're going to get into that mentality of doing testing and making testing part of the culture. That's usually where I start with it, and it works pretty well. But I don't want to dive too far into that, the specifics of the, getting teams up and running, because there's different teams, different cultures require a little bit different methodology for starting. So it's good. Yeah. So that's Scrum, scrum.org. Really wanted to take this and formalize a lot of these techniques and also make this overall framework applicable to things other than just software. So in 2009, Ken Schwaber formed scrum.org for the purposes of fighting flaccid Scrum. Flaccid Scrum, coined by Martin Fowler. Basically that teams were using Scrum terms. They were saying, hey, we're doing Scrum, and all they were doing is mini waterfall, and they were failing with it. They weren't doing testing. They weren't bringing in quality. They weren't self-organizing. They weren't doing any of the things that we've talked about, and they were bad-mouthing Scrum. So we developed curriculum, we developed presentations, we developed an agenda to fight that, to actually get things back to how we understand Agile to work, how we understand Scrum to work, and building a really, really strong team of trainers that can go out and teach the same curriculum globally. So that's different. If you go to other Scrum training providers, pretty much any other Scrum training provider, you're going to get different curriculum, different advice, different training from every trainer you take. Scrum.org, all of our classes, all of our courses are the exact same course. Of course, the trainers are going to put a little bit different spin or ideas on it, but the curriculum is exactly the same globally. That's really, really important to large organizations that want to train people and have definitions of what is product owner, what is Scrum Master, what is product backlog. You want everybody to be speaking the same language, and other Scrum training providers don't give you that. Done is one that Scrum Alliance uses a lot. We fight against that really, really hard because that breaks trust. If you don't know what the definition of done is, if you don't know how to say the word done, that's problematic. So we don't use that term. We use definition of done. This is done or it's not. There is no done. It means you didn't have it done in the first place. There's a lot of little things like that that are problematic with other curriculum and why we chose and I chose to actually partner with Scrum.org, it's a lot more legitimate of a program. So above, the next thing we're going to talk about alongside of Scrum is Agile modeling. This was parented by Scott Ambler. It really talks about how to think about modeling within Agile. And Gary's going to talk a lot about modeling and its purpose within Agile. Do you want to talk a little bit about this slide?
Just that, as you say there, collection of best practices. Not a lot of things prescribed, but a collection of best practices. I think we'll kind of go into some of the details and some of the thoughts.
Okay. The overall thing to take away from here is this is a technique to think about documentation, to think about architecture, to think about modeling in the context of Agile. Right? You see this cycle here rather than just architecture done up front. Yeah. Yeah, not directly. The ideas are supported by tools, but it's like we don't have a Agile modeling tool that supports Agile modeling directly. It's you can use tools within this infrastructure to support this. Does that make sense? XP, Extreme Programming, fathered by Kent Beck. I mean, you're seeing all these bolded names. These are the guys that signed the Agile Manifesto. Still very, very active in the community today. They all have their own ideas on how to approach Agile. This is very similar to Scrum as far as this framework goes. See iteration, you see small releases, you see the concept of a backlog with user stories. For a long time, XP really defined the engineering practices that an Agile team used, and Scrum was more of the project management side of things. And when you coupled the two, you got a very complete process, a very complete approach to doing Agile development. What you're seeing is a blending of these two. So the professional Scrum developer program, we actually talk about ideas like spike, architectural spikes. We use user stories. We calculate project velocity. We talk about release planning. We talk about doing acceptance testing and what acceptance criteria is. We talk about another element which isn't even up here, which is test-driven development, came from XP as well. So you're seeing XP also trying to decouple some of their framework. A lot of these things, again, Agile consensus. We're seeing a lot of these things that work, and you're seeing people adapt. You're seeing the guys like Kent Beck, adjust their ideas to meet what's working. I just tweeted that, is it Ward Cunningham? Who was it? One of the, I'm blanking on it, but one of the guys out there, it was Jeff Ritchie, was saying that for all of the teams that he's run with Agile, the best that he's ever seen is Scrum coupled with XP. And that's generally what you're hearing out there, and that's what we talk about in the Professional Scrum Developer Program. We also bring in things like Kanban and Lean. So, skip forward here. Lean, it's really about elimination of waste. Good book if you haven't read it already. Can be used within a lot of existing teams, whether or not you're doing Agile, whether you're doing Scrum, whether you're using XP. A lot of the Lean techniques can be used very, very well. Deciding and delivering, or deciding as late as possible, delivering as fast as possible. Gary always pings me on this one and says, we should try to change that to responsible. And that's, I like that. It's not how Mary and Tom wrote this book, but the point is, you don't want to just procrastinate, right? You want to make decisions at the right time, when you have the knowledge to make the right decision, not sooner than that. And that's an important key to lean ideas and agility. Empowering the team, right? We talked about that. Build integrity in. Make sure you're doing the right things to hit quality. Are you doing testing? Are you delivering things per your definition of done? Are you practicing software craftsmanship? We haven't talked about that at all, but the idea of software craftsmanship is also very important in Agile. See the whole. Right now we're talking more about the system thinking. We talked about the sheet metal to the car. What's the whole picture look like? What's the product that I'm building? What am I trying to achieve here? And Kanban, right? So these are two techniques that can be used within Scrum and XP to help you get your job done. David Anderson, big proponent of Kanban. Ken and Martin Fowler always say, Kanban with a capital K now, because it was just a word before it means signboard or billboard in katakana, in Japanese, and it's really all it is. And David Anderson basically said, well, here's how we're going to do it with software. We're going to have this to do, in progress, and done, and that's going to give us a good visual representation of where we are. So if you look at that signboard, you can kind of see what's going on. You don't need to have an earned value analysis. You're not looking at a Gantt chart. You're even not looking at a burn down. You can kind of see this is the bulk of work that I have to do. Here's what people are working on, and here's the stuff that's done. We use this basic Kanban idea within our Scrum teams, including things like limiting work in progress. And then what that means is don't move everything from to do to in progress and start on everything at once. Start on a few things and deliver them and finish them. Yeah, and usually with Kanban you're talking about 3 things at a time, and it's hard to see with this one if the pink represent people, and the pink is one person and the yellow may be somebody else. So this yellow person might be working on too many things. You can do creative things here too, like swim lanes for resources, right? So as you have a bulk of work over here, as you get into the in progress, you start tracking who's actually working on them. So you take the tag and actually put them in the individual resources lane. As I sign up for work, I put it in my lane, and actually you can figure out what's actually happening there. If you want to go crazy with it, you can start tracking how long did it take to go from to do to done. Cycle time, cumulative flow, how much stuff are we moving through the overall process. An interesting fact about Kanban here is a lot of the Scrum trainers were pushing back on Ken and Jeff and saying, you know what, the idea of a burn down chart doesn't make sense anymore as far as having it in the Scrum guide. Because a lot of teams were actually tracking progress using a Kanban board. So can I say I'm doing Scrum if I'm not using a burn down? No, not today. So a few weeks ago, the 2011 version of the Scrum guide came out, and you see the concept of burn down out of the Scrum guide now. For this specific reason, is that there's a few ways that you can figure out where you're going to be in a sprint other than a burn down chart. And notice you didn't see it. You didn't see it here either. You didn't see update burn down. You didn't see a picture of a burn down in there at all. And that's because of things like a Kanban board. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Right. What's interesting is that was the purpose originally of the burn down. This is a better tool for it. But the method that you're talking about is what we talk about in the professional Scrum Developer program. This is usually going to work better for the team. If you need something to communicate out, burn down probably makes more sense than sending a picture of the whiteboard. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Very common. So backing up in.
David Starr also is going to talk about taking away the described as burn down or Kanban or anything like that. David Starr is big on BDD with development. He talks about that slide, but he says that all we need to do to track where we are in the sprint is look at a list of tests. And if those tests are representative of user choice, then all we're doing is getting all tests.
backing up here, we have all these driven developments, test-driven, feature-driven, behavior-driven development, all very useful in an Agile environment. Test-driven development, Gary's going to talk about a lot of these things, but comes from XP. It's all about writing the unit test before you write code. How am I going to test this before I code it? And that impacts my design. I've heard people say TDD is just a myth. I'll stand in front of you today and say it is not just a myth. It's hard to do. It's hard to get in that way of thinking about things, but it's very, very powerful once you get there.
It's really more also, it's more about code, more than just code. Unit tests, yes, unit tests are code. Do it before code. It's a lot more than just code. Like you said, it's going to influence your design. It's also going to make sure that you avoid gold.
Right. We didn't really talk about gold plating and all, but it's the extra features that you don't really need to add, but hey, it'd be kind of cool if I did these 4 extra things in this feature. Are they needed? Probably not. The way that we talk about addressing gold plating is if you get into that mode where you want to add 4 extra things, take it to the team, get the product owner involved. Do we need to add these things to really get to where we need to be done or not? Let the team and the product owner, make the decision there. Don't just do it in a vacuum. An example would, the one that we used on Tuesday was product owner asks you to add an about box to your Windows Form application. All the product owner really wants is, the name of the product, the company name, a copyright, and an OK button. And you're sitting there and you go, it would be really cool. I just read about this WPF animation stuff. I put a little animated logo in there that kind of gallops across the screen, and it takes you 4 days to actually get it done. It's a good example of gold plating, right? It's neat. You wanted to use it. You wanted to play with it, but really not what's needed. Maybe the product owner wants to do that down the road. Let the team and the product owner make that decision. Don't do that in a vacuum. Feature-driven development, a lot about modeling. It's fairly heavy. The important thing to take away from here is features drive everything, right? So I want to build a certain feature. I'm going to model that feature. I'm going to build a team around that feature. I may even branch about around that feature. And that's how we look at everything, so that the features drive the overall development effort. It's useful. We've got some workshops that actually talk through FDD, and given certain environments, it can be very effective. BDD is a really extension of TDD, and it really talks about the domain models that you're actually working in. And I'll let Gary speak more about this in his presentation. He talks a lot about modeling. But just know that there's all these driven designs out there that really can address some of the technical issues that we see within Agile development environments.
I would say TDD specifically, evolution of AT to acceptance testing. The other one, forgot on this slide, but here
Right. Right. Yeah, I'll get that on there for the next one. Right. Right. Yeah. All right. So, we've talked about some of the cultures. We've talked about Agile, what Agile is today, some of the popular methods, how some of those ideas are embodied. What should you guys be using? How do you make those decisions? Do you just go after Scrum or not? The common thing that we see is, we're just going to try Scrum. We're going to pick up a book and try something, but it really didn't work because we're different. We're a different environment than anybody else out there. I'll tell you, with the amount of environments that I've seen, I have yet to find somebody that's truly different. Software is software out there. Yeah. You are a little special. Yeah. Our managers wouldn't really let us do it, right? We talked about a lot of this stuff. We didn't really have good teams. We talked about that. We're doing 10-week sprints. These are all things that teams do with a good attempt to go at Agile, but they fail. Ken's got a good video out there of the scrum butts and why some of these things happen and what to do about addressing them.
A little foreshadowing here. Note that
Yeah. Our architects didn't like it. I should have put that one at the top of the list. Yeah, we get that a lot. Hello. Agile success, embraced by teams and endorsed by executives. Most successful Agile teams are using a variety of techniques, and by a variety of techniques, I actually mean that we're using the 99 or 100% of the ideas coupled together. So Scrum with XP, we talked about that, very popular. Scrum with Lean and Kanban, another very popular one, where we're just doing the framework. We put the Kanban board up. We watch tasks actually flow through. We try to limit documentation and limit the amount of waste. XP with Lean, similar. Professional Scrum developer takes Scrum with XP. So we do use things like spikes, and we do user stories. And then we also manage waste through the process, and we put a visualization of the work up with the Kanban board. It's a culture shift. And the industry is arriving at an Agile consensus. So we talked about, this is a summary of kind of everything that we've talked about today. So what should you be doing? One more slide. Still quite a bit of debate on these things. XP and Scrum, the semantics of, is it an iteration, is it a sprint? This one's pretty small. Time boxing, this one's fairly hot today. Do we need to do time box at all, right? Do I need to stop developing, take a look at where I am, sample where I'm at, or just keep moving? Advocates of Kanban, just using Kanban, are saying, all I need is that board, and I just keep adding tasks on the left, and you guys just keep spitting stuff out on the right. There's a time and a place for that. We're going to look at that here next. But it's not applicable to every environment. If you have a complex piece of software where there's a lot of unknown, getting rid of time boxes can be very, very destructive, and I've seen that. Leads to complexity, right? Which technique's appropriate for how complex my software is? Am I just supporting a platform, or am I developing a new heuristic to do a search for some scientific application? Estimation, should I be using story points? Should I be using ideal days? Should I be using hours? Why or why not? Just some debate and discovery on different ways of doing that. Architecture with a capital A. Should we have architects on a team? Is architecture part of the process? Is it not? Do I need a separate team? Should I be having a team of architects that come up with a large architecture and then giving that architecture to a Scrum team? They're laughing about this, but yeah. If you go and watch the video of the Agile Manifesto 10-year reunion, Jim Highsmith actually talks about a guy that he was talking to that's developed a technique for using offshore teams to do just that. It's kind of Agile. It's not self-organizing. It doesn't talk about a lot of things that we talk about. But he's got like 120 teams, 120 offshore teams, and one architecture team in the States here, building these architectures and throwing them off to offshore teams and getting stuff back. So there's a little bit of debate on how that's going to work and the quality there, and can it scale? If it's going to work or not? The co-location there. It's like I said, we're young yet. We're still learning on some of this. We still have a lot to vet out when it comes to some of these issues. Testing. Go ahead. So I'd respond to that by saying it's different for every company, and I see a lot of that has to do with the pace of your market. If you're in a highly competitive market, I'd say no. That's changing a lot, and your competitors are releasing stuff frequently. You're probably going to want to start thinking about the Agile organization and how to actually structure that. If you're in a slower moving market, GE, good example, insurance company, yeah, there's changes. We got some regulatory stuff coming down. We're going to be Agile maybe over here, but maybe we do waterfall overall. Yeah, I mean, it can work. Even waterfall, and again, the guys on the video there bring out a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. Waterfall today isn't really waterfall as it was, 20 years ago. Waterfall today is more of an iterative process, right? There's changes. You tend to be able to get them into the process a lot easier than these formal change management systems that took 15 years to actually get anything done. Every process today seems to be a little bit lighter weight, including waterfall techniques. So, yeah, I mean, if it's working for you, keep using it.
If Chad alluded to, if it works for you, I think that's great, but you need to be vigilant. That sort of idea that you think it's working, but it's not. It's status quo, not both status quo, but also the market. It's like, maybe that works for you now. Maybe you don't have a lot of competitors in the market, but who's the young hungry guy that's coming out that's going to blow you away?
Maybe it's for another one. Work with the smaller projects, where we got a larger product organization, which is forever, and where we've got a small thing on project.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's jump to this. Oops. One moment, please. All right. So, to that note, talk about so much decided up front. We kind of know where we are. Ralph Stacey, a number of years ago, published a book on organizational dynamics. So, different levels of complexity or different ways of looking at problems based on where you are on a spectrum. On one axis, we have requirements, right? If you're down here, you know what you want to build, you have close to agreement on what's going to be built. If you're in an environment where you know exactly the stack you're going to build it in, close to certainty on that technology, you have a simple problem to solve. As you move this way, as you move out, you start getting more complicated. As you move this way, you get into complex problems. So it's like managing them using multivariate math gets difficult and gets unpredictable and starts moving towards anarchy and chaos. So what we found as an industry is that different techniques work better in certain areas of this plot. To your point, if you've got a small project, there's overhead in doing something like Scrum. So you may not want to actually do Scrum. You may want to actually use Kanban and Lean by themselves, right? Hang a board up on a wall, do some requirements gathering, post-it note them, get them done, right? Very little risk in doing that. That's because they're complicated. They're not complex. Lean, same thing, right? No process. I can just use some Lean techniques to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to focus on the value, focus on the software, instead of doing sprint reviews and doing time boxing and stuff like that. I can just deliver value in the software ASAP. Up here we have Scrum. All right, so if I back up, anarchy and chaos. How can we have Scrum up there? And we got an interesting debate in Chicago about this. What I'll tell you is that there are a lot of organizations that start projects way up here. What are we going to build? What technology stack are we going to build them in? Has anybody in here worked on a project like that where you know that there's something you got to build, but you don't know if you're going to use Ruby or .NET, and you have no idea what the requirements are going to be. So you're sitting up here somewhere. What's useful, if we put Scrum back in there, and you can think about this just in your own experience, start on day one, you do a 1-week sprint. Let's just choose a technology. Let's just choose to build something that solves that problem. And we're going to learn a little bit about what we're doing. And we're going to start moving this way. Right? We're going to start pulling things down. We're going to start getting some idea of if the technology can handle what we're asking it to do, and if the requirements make any sense. So what you'll find is as your knowledge of a product, of a market, increases, you go from this corner down here. Right? So you talked about the simple products where the 200 hours, you know what you're going to build, you're already working in an environment. Your knowledge of that product is very, very high. And so you don't need something like Scrum to actually manage that. You can use simpler techniques because you've already eliminated a lot of the risk out of the product. Does that make sense?
Part of the debate was the person felt that if you're way up in the upper right-hand corner, I just want to throw this back. You guys can finish it out. Well, you could do that anywhere. So where does that start? Where does that stop? You have some idea of what needs to be built. You have some idea of what technology you can do with it. When you start to deliver stuff, people don't know what they want until you start working software for them. So there's never an excuse to not use something. The other interesting thing is Chad talked about you're going to start to move down towards the lower left, especially when you get to maintenance. Scrum doesn't make any sense, in my opinion. Chad might challenge me. Scrum does not make any sense at all in a maintenance situation. By its very nature, you're in a maintenance situation. Whatever your sprint length is, it's not short enough by definition of what maintenance work is. So you got a 1-week sprint, it's not short enough. You have a fire in production. The fire needs to be put out. Kanban and Lean, especially Kanban, really make a lot of sense to that. Just have some visibility into what you're doing, where you're going, and show that visibility out. But iterations aren't going to make any sense.
Yep. Any questions on this one? Okay. Sure. We'll make this available to everybody after we're done with this roadshow. Most people, I was going to talk about the fact that most people are in that complex, chaotic area. I talked about that earlier in the presentation, right? That a lot of teams are actually sitting in that area that works well with Scrum. That's why I just want to put one last plug in for this PSD program. A lot of training that you get out there exists in one of these 3 camps. I'll teach you how to use Visual Studio. I'll show you how to use Scrum. Or I'll talk about best practices, right? Here's how to do loose coupling. Here's how to use TDD. Here's how to use ATDD. The PSD program couples all 3 of those things in a 5-day course where it's hands-on. We do a little bit of lecture. Here's what we're going to see. The teams actually sit down in front of Visual Studio and practice this in the confines of Scrum. Talk about, how do we think about these problems? How do we deliver things in a sprint using all of these things collaboratively? It is one of the best courses that I've ever seen out there, and I'm saying that because I looked at a lot of courses that were out there before we, as an organization, made a decision about who to partner with to develop some of these trainings. It's an awesome course. If you're looking at bringing Scrum or bringing Agile into your organization, and you feel you have a complex product, come talk to me. This is the course to take. This is your Jumpstart course. It'll get you started on Monday. You'll be able to hit the ground running.
What's interesting there is Chad teaches the VisualStudio.net side of that. I originally trained with a guy that took a Java class, and both of them told me the same sort of thing. It's like you get a couple days in, until about the last second half of second day or the third day, and everyone starts to have it. You read that sort of thing. People really start to get it. And I think that's true because it's not
common question that I get when I talk about introductory Agile like this is, how do you do self-organization? I get that question a lot. We got it on Tuesday. What tips can you give me to help a team self-organize? You know it when you see it. And I get that on the first day of the PSD course, too, is how should we self-organize? People ask me, how do we do this? I'm like, figure it out. By day 3, they're telling me how they self-organized. They're giving me the information back. So it's that emergent learning that is very, very valuable. Any other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. If it's within the Scrum team, Gary's going to talk about some of this in his presentation. Yeah.
What we do see people that try to bring the technical around sit outside. And sometimes I think we're lucky that people on the team are a lot more clued in and technical than they would. So it's easy to allow this to move along. But yeah, we do see that people try to get inside. It ends up being a problem. So we need to figure out how to do it. A lot of it is just building trust. These guys are not out there. This isn't just complete chaos. They're not doing whatever they want. But they're coming up with designs, with vetting those designs out with that it's developing a product that needs to extend faster, etc. So it's in a place where it has to
Yes.